I was in the Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force. Spent time in England with the Bomber Command, flying 4-engine bombers over Germany and France. Trained in Australia, actually, before being sent to England and seconded to the RAF in England.
It didn't matter what I did, as long as they gave me a job, of course, but it didn't matter. As long as there was someone free to go over, then that was your reward, my reward, and released him to go overseas, and I took his job just on the switchboard. You see, that's how I looked at it, that I was just giving a little bit like that back.
I joined the Navy at age 17, quite ridiculous, and we were called volunteers. And we went to Caboolture in Queensland and trained on landing barges. So I reversed it, and I was just a natural, and I became a coxswain of a landing barge.
I think for young fellas, for a kick-off, you didn't realise, but it was just sort of a shock when you saw dead people laying around and what have you. The reality of the whole situation. I think that was my experience there. I think my first one was seeing the African who was with the Vichy French was laying on the side of the ground, blowing up like dead. I mean, it was a sight you never ever forgot.
We just say little prayers and say, send them safely back home. May it not be long. Who would have known it would be that long?
Most of the major cities, Hamburg, Berlin, Nuremberg, Frankfurt, most of those towns were surrounded with heavy ack guns, close fighter enemies from the air and searchlights. And to get through all those defences was quite a harrowing experience.
Sydney had the submarines there, and they were bombed in the northern part of Western Australia, Darwin and around the Queensland part. Apart from that, the war actually never touched people, only a few restrictions and shortages and things like that. Well, look, if our boys can be over there fighting, you can put up with restrictions and shortages.
It was like fighting an unknown enemy. You never ever saw them, but at the same time, it was a very serious situation. But the experience, I think, was one thing that made me grow up very quick. Virtually the next 3 years there was a big education in a lot of things, You learned hate and feelings which you didn't think you ever had. And then you had to adjust. And then you had to adjust your life.
One story that I can remember well is in a place called Morotai. We discovered there was an American barge, a huge barge, and it was full of American beer. And I was coxswain of a landing barge, so busted the lock. And we just took out crates and crates of beer and stored it in the diesel tanks of the landing barge. But of course the weather was hot and it needed things to be cool with these carbon dioxide cylinders. And we found by taking the end off the cylinder and giving them a full bore and putting a paper bag over the end, we turned the carbon dioxide into dry ice. And so we just inserted the beer and we had ice-cold beer at Americans' expense.
I often tell the story that I could drive a 4-engine bomber before I could drive a motor car.
If it wasn't for certain things happening, well, I would have, it would have been all the different, I wouldn't have been here. 3 or 4 times I should have been dead, but I didn't.
It took so long for it to be over, and that had great joy and great sadness. Joy that they no longer be sent overseas. The sadness was those whose boys never came back, the husbands, the brothers, the cousins and nephews. That part was very sad, knowing that family wouldn't have joy and happiness like the rest of us.
We should not forget at any time the sacrifices they made for the country, for Australia.